How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to my channel. Today, we're going to talk about some things I call reinventing the wheel, where they are taking some old cards, whether they're from the reserve list or they've been cards that were banned in the past or whatever they might have been doing with those cards, and trying to reinvent them where they're a little more fair or that they're just, reversionings of things off the reserve list. So with that said, let's take a look at some of these cards now and see what kind of craziness they're going to be throwing at us with the Modern Horizons 3 set. First up are a few of the cards that were leaked and then revealed early as part of Wizards kind of doing damage control and trying to cover their butt for the leaks about a month ago, with White of the Reliquary and Chthonian Nightmare. The White of the Reliquary, it's a riff on the Knight of the Reliquary, which you get lands by sacking a forest or plains to search up for any land, whereas this version has you sacrifice the creatures to get a similar effect, but it costs a little bit less also to cast straight up. And then Chthonian Nightmare is obviously a reimagining of Recurring Nightmare, a card that's on the reserve list and is banned in Commander for a very, very long time now because it is very highly abusable. This is a slightly cheaper version than the original to cast, but then it's also tied to how much energy you can produce and sit on to bring back bigger and bigger things to reanimate. And just like the original, it returns to your hand ready to recast and bring more energy and things in there. So this is one of these cards that we might have to watch it, because if there's even a whiff of a consistent infinite combo where you could chain cast this and juggle something out of the grave, it might end up joining Recurring Nightmare on the Commander ban list. Also in those original leaks, we saw Spawn Gang Commander and Null Drifter. So what we got is a Siege Gang Commander corrected by the Eldrazi, flinging Eldrazi spawns instead of goblins. It's kind of a fun throwback to one of my favorite standard formats from about 20 years ago. And Mulldrifter getting Eldrazified is also kind of flavorful, and it's just a pretty good card as well. Just be aware that Annihilator is one of those abilities that can get you hated out of a game if you hard cast the Mulldrifter and start attacking with it. So even if it's just a small amount like this, you might get some salt out of this kind of card. Now, moving on from the cards that were revealed a few weeks ago, let's take a little closer look at some of the new things, starting off with Necro Dominance, triple black, skip your draw step. At the beginning of your end step, you can pay any amount of life, and if you draw that many cards, your max hand size is 5, and if a card or token will be put into your graveyard for everywhere, exile it instead. So this is a new version of Necropotence, and you know what? Sign me up. I love Necropotence. The key differences with this one do make it much weaker than the original, but it is still very good. This version, if your cards hit the yard from anywhere, not just from discarding them, they get exiled. And also, you can't respond to removal with this one. With Necropotence, you could pay a bunch of life and exile the cards and then get them at the end of your turn as part of a delayed trigger set up by the activation of Necropotence. With Necro Dominance, you cannot do that because it is a trigger that sets up at the beginning of your end step. So if it gets blown up, you cannot load it up in response. It also drops your max hand size by 2 cards, but this can be worked around by playing cards that remove your hand size, but you have to play them after you've played Necro Dominance. The time stamping matters, and the newest ability to resolve takes precedence when it comes to this kind of thing. That said, if you have something that cares about card draw triggers, Necro Dominance draws you the cards instead of exiling them and putting them into your hand, so it may be better in that kind of situation, such as with Shieldred the Apocalypse. Then we have Primal Prayers for 2 green. It's an enchantment that says whenever it enters the battlefield, you get 2 energy counters. You may cast creature spells with mana value 3 or less by paying an energy rather than paying their mana cost. And if you cast a spell this way, you may cast it as though it had flash. Unlike Necro Dominance, Primal Prayers is almost a 1-for-1 remake of the reserve list card Allurin, with the only difference being energy counter creation and payment of energy to get the free cast. Otherwise, it costs the same amount of mana and virtually does the same thing, which means you can do some pretty busted stuff that can combo off and kill your opponents in the right shell. Right now, another new card that is being brewed up alongside of it, Guide of Souls, which gives you an energy counter and a life when a creature enters the battlefield. Most are pairing those things with Asarak the Archlich so that it can be cast for free with the Primal Prayers. You get an energy off the guide, you bounce the Asarak back to your hand, and then you just go through that over and over again and go through like the Lost Mines of Phandelver dungeon, and there's a part of the dungeon that's like target opponent loses a life. You just keep looping that over and over and they die, and if they can't break your loop, it's an infinite combo. You present the loop and then you're like, can you stop it? No. Well, then you lose. You could also pair this up with other creatures that do the same kind of self-bouncing thing, like a White Mane Lion or a Stone Cloaker, to get ETBs for like infinite life off the Guide of Souls, or any other ETBs for a creature entering that you would like to abuse. Some players mentioned Greenbelt Rampager for this one, but it has a lot of hoops to jump through because because first, you have to pay the energy if you have it to pay with green belts enter the battlefield trigger, which defeats the idea of playing it and bouncing it back. So you'll have to use something else to bleed off all your other energy before you start trying to use the rampager to go ahead and go off with it. I do like this because it does cut out the need for the guide, and you can kind of arc the deck in a little bit different direction, but that extra thing that you need to watch out for could come around and bite you from time to time. And then we have a card that I think has a wide degree of overreaction, and that is Strict Serenade. For a blue, it's an instant counter target artifact, creature, or planeswalker spell. Its controller creates a 2/2 blue bird token with flying. No, I don't think that this is a must-play staple for blue. It's good, but it's not a be-all, end-all counter for all blue decks, contrary to what players are saying on social media. However, this will likely generate lots of interest, and that will make it expensive to pick up. If you are looking for a way to counter a commander now and then, you're just as well suited by playing something like Wash Away, which also has the added benefit of being able to counter any card that's either been plotted, foretold, or any other ways of being exiled and you have to deal with it. Or, just pay the extra mana and you can use it to counter any spell rather than just being restricted to the 3 things that the Strict Serenade is restricted to. But it's your choice of which one you want to have access to and what you're willing to pay for Strict Serenade, which I'm betting will probably be about a $20 card coming out the gate. Then we have a new commander that's going to be fun, but might see some play in other formats. We'll see, and that is the Necro Bloom. For 1, a white, a black, and a green, you get a plant with landfall that says whenever a land enters your battlefield under your control, you get a 0/1 plant creature token, but if you control 7 or more lands with different names, you get a 2/2 black zombie creature token instead, and land cards in your graveyard have Dredge 2, and it's a 2/7 base power and toughness, so it will slot in nicely with Doran the Siege Tower. Now, this is what you get when you take a busted as hell card that's banned in Modern, Pioneer, Historic, and Historic Brawl, but you make it good, but not a nightmare to deal with. Field of the Dead has seen bans in all these formats for one real reason. It's a land. Now, you might say, well, no shit, it's a land. Well, why does that matter? Well, it's all about interactivity. There's not many cards that can actually deal with Field of the Dead because it's a land, and once it's online, being a land, you can't counter it, so it's a little bit harder to deal with. The Necro Bloom, on the other hand, it can be countered outside of running things that prevent countering of spells, and it can be killed by hundreds of different removal spells in the game, many more than what is available to blow up lands, making this a much more balanced card. Now, it likely won't see play in Modern, even though this is a Modern Horizons set. It's likely too slow for that. But in Commander and Historic Brawl, oh yes, you will see this guy pop up on my channel. I love Abzan colored commanders, and getting a new option to play with is right up my alley. And speaking of right up my alley, it's Wheel of Potential. For 2 and a red, you get a sorcery that gives you 3 energy counters, and then you can pay X energy. Each player may exile their hand and draw X cards, where if X is 7 or higher, you can play the cards you exiled this way until the end of your next turn. So you have until the end of this turn plus the next turn to cast those things off. Well, this is a reinvented Wheel of Fortune, uses energy as a way to differentiate it from the original and not break the reserve list rules. That said, it's a pretty balanced card with the energy part, and you can actually make this scale beyond what the original Wheel of Fortune can actually draw for you if you can get enough energy for it. So for as much energy you can build up, you can dump it all and draw that many cards. The bad part is this is a May ability, so you cannot rely on it to force your opponents to draw if they snip out any trickery on your part. And with the energy reliance, unless we have enough ways to get big bursts of energy, I don't know if I'd really want this for something like my Locust God deck, which was where my original Wheel of Fortune resides. Wheeling for just 3 isn't going to cut it in that deck, and you'd likely be exiling a handful of cards just to get 3 cards off of that. And then we have Trickster's Elk. For 2 and a green, it's an elk with bestow of 1 and a green, and the enchanted creature loses its abilities and becomes an elk creature with base power 3/3. So, this isn't exactly a powerhouse, nor is its predecessor, but for the heavy green crowd out there, Kindler's Transformation is a great way to cut down a hard to remove creature or an opposing commander, and this does the same thing, but it's on a bestow creature, meaning that even if they let that creature die or use it as a blocker or sacrifice it down the line, you're not losing the aura, but instead getting that 3/3 back on your side of the board as a creature. The only downside here is you don't get a card like you do with the transformation, but I plan on packing both of the cards in my green decks when I want this kind of effect. Then we have a card that is a mirror of a very powerful card from back in the day. This is Power Balance. For red, it's an enchantment. Whenever an opponent casts a spell, you may reveal the top card of your library, and if you do, you can cast the card without paying its mana cost if the two spells have the same mana value. Now, Counterbalance had the deal if it was a blue, and then when they cast a spell, you could reveal the top card, and if they were the same mana value, you countered their spell, and that worked really well with Sensei's Divining Top. While you could do something similar here, you could use Divining Top, or any other way of stacking the top of your deck with like scries or whatever at instant speed in order to, go, okay, I'll go ahead and copy and I'll go ahead and get this for free, essentially. So I really like this card. It's a fun play on it, and it's nowhere near as busted as Counterbalance was. Then we have something that I think could only come out of a mad scientist laboratory, and that is Frogmere Enforcer. 7 colors. Frogmere has prototype of 3 and a red, creates a 2/2, and then it's a 4/4 base, and it has affinity for artifacts. So basically, they merged the original affinity for artifacts, creatures, Frogmite, and Mirror Enforcer, and created this Frogmere Enforcer. The prototype side gives you the Frogmere side, and the regular side gives you the Mirror Enforcer. Both sides have affinity, making the cost cheaper. However, unlike the original Frogmite, that side of the card can't become free and will just cost you at least a red mana. With enough artifacts, though, the Enforcer side can be free just like its original card. Now, if you're in an artifact-heavy build, even if it's just a lot of artifact tokens, this may find a home where artifact creatures matter. Sadly, I cannot slot this into my Urza Chief Artificer deck. Why did it have to be red? And speaking of red, we get a nice throwback to Mog Fanatic with Mog Mob. Triple red goblin, sacrifice it, deals 3 damage divided as you choose among 1, 2, or 3 targets, and it's a 3/3. So smack 3 Mog Fanatics together, and this is what you get. With the added benefit of being able to hit multiple targets, this is O'Hare Ashenil's new best friend. And another throwback, but not as nice as the Mog, is Wormcoil Larva. For 3 black Phyrexian Worm with Death Touch and Lifelink. When it dies, create a 1/2 and a 2/1 Phyrexian Worm artifact creature. 1 with Death Touch, 1 with Lifelink, and it's a 3/3 to start out with. Now, I said this is not as nice. I'm not as keen on this card as I was the Mog Mob. This isn't slapping together a pair of Wormcoil engines, but it's shrinking them, but not by enough for what you get. I think this should have been a 4 mana creature at this size, and for what you get off of it dying. At the printed cost, I'd rather just use the original Wormcoil engine, not be color locked in black, and get a significant upgrade over this card. I appreciate the effort, but this one's a bit of a miss for me. What isn't a miss, though, is the reinvention of one of the reserve list cards with Volatile Storm Drake. For 1 in the blue, it's a Drake with flying and hexproof from activated and triggered abilities. When it enters the battlefield, exchange control of it and a target creature an opponent controls, and if you do, you get 4 energy counters, and then sack that creature unless you pay an amount of energy equal to its mana value, and this is a 3/2. So for the same casting cost of its inspiration, the Gilded Drake, the Storm Drake gives you that same kind of power and effect, but it's tied to energy as you pay into it as part of the swap with an opponent's creature. Limited in what kind of decks you can kind of put it into unless you're aiming at only 4 drops or less. This still gives you a much more affordable version of this kind of effect over the Gilded Drake, which is currently going for about $250 if you want this kind of thing in your deck. And then sticking with blue, let's take a look at Brain Surge. 2 in a blue instant, draw 4 cards, put 2 back on top of your library in any order. Now, they granted Brainstorm 1 more card for 2 more mana in this card, and it's kind of the compromise for Modern, and it says that they think Brainstorm is just too good for Modern. For Commander, this will be a decent draw spell, and it operates in the same way as you would with a Brainstorm, but you will have to decide what kind of things you want in your deck, because there are much better card draw spells out there that you could be using over this. Then we have an effort at fixing a card that was banned in Modern with Birthing Ritual. For 1 in a green enchantment at the beginning of your end step, if you control a creature, look at the top 7 of your library. You can sacrifice a creature, and if you do, you may put the creature card from a mana value of X or less from among those cards onto the battlefield, where X is 1 plus the sacrificed creature's mana value. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Birthing Pod caught a ban a few years ago for enabling you to tutor up basically whatever you needed to pummel your opponent. Birthing Ritual tries to keep that effect but tone down its effectiveness by limiting the amount of cards you get to look through to find your target. With that downside, they do make it so you get to search the cards first and then decide if you're going to bother with doing the sacrifice, and then you can go ahead and use that. So this is a lot less abusable than the original, because this is also a triggered ability over an activated one like the birthing pod. So there's no untapping and chaining into bigger creatures off of this one and doing that kind of thing. I think this one will be a bit more fair than the original. And then last but not least for today's video, this is a color shifted card that once saw a lot of play in Commander. This card is Disciple of Frailes for 3 and triple green. It's an elf druid that says when it enters the battlefield, you can sack another creature, and if you do, gain X life, draw X cards where X is that creature's power, and it's a 3/3, and then it has a backside. It's a land, Garden of Frailes. As it enters, you can pay 3 life, and if you don't, it enters tapped, and it taps for a green. Now, if that ETB sounds familiar, that's because it's exactly what Disciple of Bolas does. This is green's version of that card. You get a slightly bigger body and a land on the back when needed, but at 6 mana, 3 of it being green, it's going to be really hard to cast this outside of a mono green deck in Commander and in Historic Brawl. I get that this is an off-color thing for green to do with something like this. That's why they've boosted the cost. But couldn't they just made this the same mana value and body size, keeping it like the Disciple Bolas, make it like 1 triple green as a 2/2. Then you'd have to deal with the harsher casting cost still while keeping the tie-in to the original Disciple that it was clearly modeled after. Heavy green decks in need of card draw will likely run this, but outside of that, I just don't see this going into too many decks with that kind of casting cost. So that's what I have for you guys today. There's probably more of these kind of cards coming in the previews this week, and we'll see what else they put out there. But these are the ones I spotted that were just basically knockoffs of an original, or just ways of fixing cards that were either deemed way too powerful for Modern or way too powerful other formats, and trying to make them work once more. We'll see how good they do. Some of these might see some bans in some formats. I'm eyeballing a few of these, like Historic and Historic Brawl. Some of these cards might actually get axed. I'm not sure, because those formats are not really built to deal with some of the power levels of some of this stuff. So we'll see what happens. With that said, I hope you liked what was going on here today. And if you do, please like, share, comment, subscribe. All those things help my channel grow as I'm on my road to 1,000 subscribers. And as always, thank you for watching. Have a great day, and I will see you in the next video.